George Bernard Shaw said, "The United States and Great Britain are two countries separated by a common language." Oscar Wilde wrote, "We have really everything in common with America nowadays, except, of course, language." But what happened over time to make American English so different from British English? You'll find out in this episode of
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hi y'all, Reza here, how y'all doing?
Reza, you've gone all American today. What's happened to you? Your accent has changed to American.
Sorry, I was trying to do an American accent, but not very good, yes. That was my attempt at a southern United States accent, but it didn't really work, did it? No.
So my name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching between us, whether we're speaking British English or American English, we're going to help you with this podcast improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, Reza?
I'm feeling jolly good, as British people say. How are you?
Awesome,
as Americans say.
I'm feeling awesome. If you're a new listener to the podcast, you're very, very welcome. And if you're back again for another episode, welcome. What's first this week, Reza?
First of all, we got a voice message from Alberto from Milan or Milano.
Hello, Reza and Craig. Here is Alberto from Milano, Italy. It has been a long time since I sent you my last voice message, and I've just listened to the episode about the story of English language. It was very, very interesting. Thank you very much for it. And I have a suggestion for a possible topic, and it's about the American English. I would like to know more about the story of American English, the difference between native English and American English and so on. Is it possible? Thank you very much as usual. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for your lovely message. And I did not hear one mistake. That was excellent, Alberto. Wonderful message. Reza, did you hear any problems with that?
No mistakes at all, neither grammar nor vocabulary. What's more, your pronunciation was fantastic as well. Well done, Alberto.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you for your idea. And that is the focus of today's podcast, a history of American English, a brief history in about 20 minutes if we can. And we're not going to focus on differences between the use of American English and British English very much, because we've done that in depth. We've done that quite thoroughly in the past. If you go to episode 288, for example, we speak about the differences between British and American English. That's inglespodcast.com/288. Also, in 81, we spoke about the same thing, so inglespodcast.com/81. And I interviewed a good friend of mine, Danny, who is originally from Detroit, about British and American vocabulary. So you can compare my British accent and his American accent. And there's a link in the show notes to that interview. Go to inglespodcast.com/335.
Yes, as Craig said, this episode is going to concentrate on the history of American English. So let's start with a few historical facts. Did you know that British English first arrived in North America in 1605? Not that long ago in the history of the world, if you think about it. 1605. 3 ships docked in a place called Jamestown.
What does dock mean?
Well, dock could be a verb or a noun. In this case, it's a verb. To dock, to arrive at the dock. The dock is the area where ships park, if you like, in a port. So 3 ships docked in Jamestown in the state of what we now call Virginia. And the town was called Jamestown after King James I of England. So don't forget, it's easy to forget that North America, well, parts of North America, used to be a British colony. Don't forget that. Of course, now Craig and I would be the first people to admit that America is a much more powerful country in the world than the UK, but it used to be the reverse. What we now consider the United States and Canada were actually colonies of the UK. Don't forget that.
And only 15 years after that, the Mayflower, which you may have heard of, the Mayflower is the name of a famous ship, that arrived in Cape Cod in Massachusetts in 1620, and on that ship were English Puritans. And a Puritan, they were people who wanted to purify, make more pure the Church of England. They wanted to remove the influence of Roman Catholics from the Protestant Church. So after that initial ship, the Mayflower, arriving in Massachusetts, 200 ships followed that, and they started to settle along the east coast of North America. And the verb to settle, which means make a home somewhere, to live permanently in one place. For example, Reza and I came to Spain to settle. We settled in Spain. So these people came from Europe, from the UK, and settled on the east coast of America.
Sometimes people refer to these English Puritans who arrived in North America as the Pilgrim Fathers.
That's right.
Pilgrim Fathers. Although it's a little bit controversial now. Controversial means you've got to be careful when you use it because you might upset some people. Because, fathers, it's the idea of like they started the family. And let's not forget that there were many, many tribes and subdivisions of tribes in North America before the Europeans arrived. That includes the Spanish as well. But for many years, it was taught in American history books that they were the Pilgrim Fathers.
And it really annoys me when I was a kid, when I was at school, we were taught that they founded America. To found means to discover. Well, they didn't discover it. It was there before they arrived, and people lived there before they arrived. So I think that's something that I think they've stopped doing now. But when I was young, we were taught that these pilgrims, these Puritans, went over to America and they founded. Well, they didn't really.
And what's more, not only were the British obviously not the first Europeans in North America, because everybody knows the Spanish were there before them, but the Spanish weren't even the first Europeans, by the way. It's now accepted by 99% of people that almost certainly the Vikings made it to North America. There's evidence of this. They didn't settle much, they didn't do much, but there were Vikings in North America before even the Spanish.
And it wasn't only the English that went to that part of the world. Many French arrived also and settled along the St. Lawrence and the Mississippi rivers in places like New Orleans, Louisiana. Actually, Louisiana is named after Louis XIV, the French king. And that part of the US became a center for French culture.
Yes, I'd really love to visit Louisiana.
Me too.
It's something that's always attracted me. As you say, the idea of the mixture there, the French influence, but also Spanish as well, and Anglo-Saxon and Celtic and all sorts of Afro-American, Native Indian, all mixed up in Louisiana. It's got to be a really, really unique place. I'd love to visit it. And in fact, I've dabbled. The word dabble, D-A-B-B-L-E, means to kind of experiment, but you don't really know what you're doing. I've dabbled a bit in the music from that part of the world. I played in a group for a short time of Cajun music. That's C-A-J-U-N, Cajun. And that's an English word which comes from French, Acadien, which refers to French speakers from Canada. They made it down to Louisiana. And even to this day, a lot of the music you'll hear in Louisiana is sung in French, not English, because of this influence that Craig has mentioned of French culture there.
And it wasn't only the French that settled in the US, the Dutch. Dutch means people that come from Holland. The Dutch landed also on the east coast. And one of the places they founded, that's that verb again, to found, they founded New Amsterdam. of course, Amsterdam, the capital of Holland, but the British forced them to change New Amsterdam to New York. And that happened in 1664. And I suppose because York was a really important city in England at the time, so they preferred to call it New York than New Amsterdam. And some of the words that the Dutch brought with them to America, coleslaw. I didn't know that fact. Coleslaw, which is ensalada de col, and also cookies, galletas, comes from Dutch, and they introduced coleslaw and cookies, among other words, into American English.
Apart from the Dutch, their neighbours in Europe, the Germans, also made it to Europe. Above all, Bavarians from the south of Germany, they settled in Pennsylvania. And they brought with them pretzels and the word delicatessen. If you think about it, delicatessen is a mixture of the word delicate from English with the German word essen, which means eat. So it's to eat delicate, delicatessen.
And sometimes they're just called delis these days, like a deli, a New York deli, for example.
Italians, everybody always thinks of Italians as one of the major groups of American society, Italian Americans. Obviously, we know that pizza is very popular in America. They brought the word with them, pasta as well. Unfortunately, they also brought the word mafia with them. And
not only the word.
not only the word, the idea. And by the way, we know not all Italians are mafiosos. Alberto from Milano, don't worry. And all the other Italians listening, it's a stereotype, but the word came with them. And also that word, which I love, zucchini. It's a word I love. It's so Italian, isn't it?
So Italian.
We don't say zucchini in the UK and Ireland. We say the French word courgette, but in the United States and Canada, they prefer the Italian word zucchini.
I lived in New York for 6 months when I was younger, and I remember speaking to an Italian-American lady where I worked in a cafe, and we got quite friendly, and one day she said, I have a fantastic recipe for you, Craig. It's chicken cacciatore. And she explained the recipe to me. And she said, and you need zucchinis. And I did not know what a zucchini was. I said, what's a zucchini? She goes, oh, it's a vegetable. And she explained it to me because I had never heard the word zucchini. So, of course, all these influences coming into America from Germany, from Italy, from Holland, and also from Africa, of course, because of the slave trade at that time, and obviously Spanish influence, heavy Irish influence. A lot of Irish people arrived in the US, and the Jewish language, the Jewish culture also. So all of these influences and countries coming together, we can say that it's a melting pot. To melt is fundir or fundirse. A melting pot is a fusion of cultures coming together and becoming one. And I think it's crisol in Spanish, although I hadn't heard that word before. Had you heard that word, crisol?
Yep, I knew that word, yeah. Not surprisingly, a lot of the words used in the United States are borrowed from Native Americans. They're their words that have got into the English language, largely because people had never seen the things that they had before, like the word raccoon. And no European had seen a raccoon before. By the way, in Spanish, that's mapache. We didn't know what they were, so we've adopted the Native American word. Also the word squash, that's calabaza, and moose, which is that animal, Alfie. Not mousse that you eat.
Not chocolate mousse.
Not Craig wishes we were talking about chocolate
Getting
mousse.
excited there.
We're talking about the animal, so that's M-O-O-S-E. Mousse Alfie.
And also when you look at the states that the USA is comprised of, that it's made up from, the 50 states that make up the USA, less than half of them have names that have English language origins. For example, from the Spanish, we have Colorado, which is colored red after the Colorado River, and Montana, obviously from montaña, mountain, very mountainous state. Nevada, from snow, and Hawaii, which has roots in the Hawaiian Polynesian language. And I think Hawaii means homeland or something similar. And they have a similar word in Maori from New Zealand and Samoan language as well, Hawaii. And of course, Louisiana, which is named after King Louis XIV of France.
So that was Spanish, French influence, Hawaiian, but the most important influence of place names is again the Native American Indians. And many of their words have been anglicized, converted to suit the English language, to give place names. For example, Connecticut, which is a difficult word to pronounce because the way it's written isn't really the way you pronounce it. If you said it the way it's written, you would think it was Connecticut, but it isn't. It's Connecticut. You can look at the spelling in the show notes. And that comes from something called the Algonquian language. You've probably never heard of that. I hadn't either till I did my internet research. But of course, it's a Native American language. There were many. And it has a meaning. It means beside the long tidal river.
Oh, wow.
Here's one which I think is even nicer. It's a lovely idea. Kentucky.
It's not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Is that where that? No?
Doesn't come from that. No, it's a bit more romantic than that.
Wasn't invented by Colonel Sanders?
No, it even predates him. It's from the Iroquoian, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'll try again. Iroquoian language. And it means land of tomorrow, which is really beautiful, I think. Land of tomorrow.
That's nice.
North and South Dakota are two different states, but they both refer to the Dakota tribe. So they were a group of people who inhabited, and still do, those territories. Then the state of Minnesota, that also comes from the Dakota language, and it means sky-tinted water, a very poetic description of a state.
That's also lovely. Sky-tinted water.
Tinted means slightly coloured.
Like tinted glasses. You can have glasses that have a colour in them.
Missouri comes from the Missouri language, so the Missouri were a tribe, and it means town of large canoes. I often think of kind of lakes when I think of Missouri. And Massachusetts, a state that Craig mentioned earlier, comes from the Massachusetts language, and it means people of the great hills. So there's just a few examples of states whose name comes from American Indian language.
I found another one also. Another one occurs to me, Florida. From Pascua, Florida, the Feast of Flowers, named after Easter from the Spanish language, Florida. So moving on to 1755, Samuel Johnson, the famous English writer, published his Dictionary of the English Language. Now, this is about 150 years before any formal Cambridge dictionary was published. But a year after, so in 1756, Johnson officially recognized the American dialect. And that was really important because he was a very famous person at the time. His dictionary had a huge impact in the English-speaking world. And he said, yes, we have to recognize the American dialect.
There were some words that weren't in common usage in England, but were commonly used in America first. We'll give you a few examples. The very common words allow, which means permit, to guess, reckon, all these words which British, American, Australian, Irish, English speakers all over the world use now, were first commonly used in America.
So guess immediately, I think, yeah, because Americans are more likely to say, I guess so than I suppose so. Although reckon, even though I recognize it as typically American, it's also very common in British English. We'd say, I reckon it's going to rain, for example.
It is now, but I reckon the Americans were using it a lot more before us.
Well, I guess you're right, buddy.
Can you think of any more, Craig?
Well, there's obviously fall, F-A-L-L, which means autumn, autumno, in American English. And gotten, where we say in British English, get, got. In American English, it's get, got, gotten. So that third form is different in American English.
You mentioned American English. What does that mean? Well, in 1802, the United States Congress recorded the first use of the expression, of the phrase, the American language. They're talking about English, of course, but in 1802, that's when it's first officially referred to.
And after the First World War, the feeling, the atmosphere in North America was very, very patriotic. And in 1923, the state of Illinois, the General Assembly in Illinois, they passed an act of law that said, in part, the official language of the state of Illinois shall be known hereafter as the American language and not the English language. So hereafter means after this. So from now on, we're going to call it the American language and not the English language, a clear break from England.
However, having said that, you might be surprised to hear that there is no official federal language of the United States. I mean, federal for the whole country.
Really? It's not English?
No.
That surprises me.
There's none. None is officially. So each state can have an official language if they want. Because remember, it's the United States of America. Each state can have an official language if they want. But not all of them do either. Only 31 states of the 50 have laws that recognize English as an official language. The others don't. So, yeah, you have to speak English. If you don't, you won't get very far. But it isn't actually the official language. And there are 3 states that have other official languages in addition to English. In the United States, hard to believe, right? Because you think, oh, America is so dominant English language. But in Hawaii, Hawaiian Pidgin English, which is English mixed with Polynesian languages, is recognized as one of the official languages of Hawaii, so only in that state.
Which probably is easier because it's an island state, so they're kind of detached a little from mainland USA.
Right. And do you remember earlier we were talking about the Dakota people? Mm-hmm. So South Dakota is a state. So Sioux language, that's spelled Sioux. They were one of the tribes that lived there. That's recognized in South Dakota. And about 20 indigenous languages are recognized in the state of Alaska. That doesn't surprise me because you probably know that Alaska used to be part of Russia. The Americans bought it from Russia. So that shouldn't surprise anybody that they have different languages. Strangely, though, Russian is not accepted as one of the languages because the people in Alaska, although it was part of Russia, they didn't feel very Russian either. They kind of had their own clans and tribes. We spoke about French. In Louisiana, it's extremely important, as we mentioned, but in fact, it isn't recognized as an official language. I was surprised at that. I presumed it was, but I did my research and it's not officially recognized. Although many people in Louisiana can speak French, they have French names. They're called like Claude Bernier, and they are born in New Orleans, but it's not a recognized language, strangely enough.
And North America is pretty widely known as the home of capitalism. If you think of capitalism, America usually comes to mind very quickly. And of course, capitalism in North America brought many new words into English. For example, break even has its origins in North America. If you break even, you don't win and you don't lose. Let's imagine you go into a casino with $100 and you gamble and you bet and you play on blackjack and different games and you leave the casino with $100, then you have broken even. So to break even, neither win nor lose. Another word is bottom line, which is what you get at the end of something. And that's very common very commonly used in business. What's the bottom line? What's the end result? Reza, can you think of any other words that we get from American capitalism?
Yes, the very common expression used in business, merger, is a word which started in American English. To merge, M-E-R-G-E, is to mix two things together. So a merger is when two companies come together and now they're one new company.
Yeah, there was a big merger in 2019 when Disney and 20th Century Fox came together. Actually, I think Disney acquired 20th Century Fox. So a merger should be pretty much equal, on equal terms from the two companies coming together. But if one company acquires another, it buys it and it puts it inside its own company with its own branding. So it's two different things, acquiring and merging.
And another business term, very common, that the Americans used first is to downsize. Well, in fact, it's also used outside business, but when we think of companies, if it downsizes, it's becoming smaller. It might be because they have less money, it might be because they have to get rid of staff, or it could be for strategic reasons, any of those. But also outside the world of business, now people talk about downsizing. Personally, that means they're moving to a smaller house or flat. For example, when people get old, particularly if they live on their own, they might live in a big house and it's too much for them to handle, so they downsize to a smaller house or flat.
And sadly, that's happening a lot at the moment. We're recording this podcast at the time of the coronavirus pandemic, and many companies are downsizing. They are sacking staff or firing staff. They're closing shops and branches and making their businesses smaller. Another expression is a blue chip company. If something is blue chip, it's regarded or thought of as being high quality. And that's used especially in investment terms. A blue chip company is a reliable investment. The shares of that company are likely to rise if it's blue chip.
American English has drifted back. It's slowly moved back across the pond. When we say across the pond, it's not really a pond. Pond is charco. We're really talking about the Atlantic Ocean, which
quite a big pond.
Very big pond. The water which separates North America from Britain and Ireland and the rest of Europe, of course. So American English has drifted back across the pond through movies, as we all know, films, the internet, globalization in general, bringing the English language with its Americanisms, its American expressions with it, and of course, English-American culture, and making it all very close.
Sometimes I get asked, Reza, from students whether to learn British English or American English. What do you think? Does it really matter these days? The languages are very close because of globalization. What do you advise students when they ask you that question?
For me, it's virtually irrelevant. I don't have a strong opinion on it. Unless you know as a fact that you're going to go and live somewhere where they speak English as the first language. So if you know you're going to go and live in New York, well, it's probably more useful if you learn American English. If you know you're going to go and live in London, might be a good idea to learn British English, but not essential, I would say. What do you think?
I agree with that, especially when you're speaking to people. Last week, we had a question on the podcast about the difference between vacation and holiday. And most people who live in America know what a holiday is, and most people in Britain know what a vacation is. So as far as the vocabulary is concerned, the language does cross backwards and forwards across the pond very easily. So you're probably not going to have problems. It's always a good idea to learn both words. But I would suggest, especially if you're thinking of taking an exam, to focus on one of those. So either learn British English or learn American English and be consistent in your exam answers. Because if you mix the vocabulary sometimes, then that could be a problem in an exam. But in the working environment, I agree with you. I don't think it matters.
Yeah, when I said it doesn't matter, I meant British or American, but I agree with Craig, don't mix, because then you sound stupid. Can you imagine someone speaking Spanish who spoke for 20 seconds with an Andaluz accent, then for a minute with a Bolivian accent, then they decided to use a Cuban one with all its words and grammar, and then, I don't know, Puerto Rico or something like that? It would be a bit weird.
Yeah.
You might understand them, but it would sound really weird. So obviously you don't do that in English either. So thanks very much for listening. Now it's up to you to make an effort. Why don't you get talking in British or American English?
We don't mind.
Or Irish, New Zealand, Australia, we really don't care at all. Why don't you send us a voice message to www.speakpipe.com/English podcast.
Or you could send us an email with a comment or question. You could write to me. It's Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, or write to Reza at belfastreza, Reza, at gmail.com. And also, if you're looking for a paid course to improve your English on the Mansion Inglés website, you can find the store, and the address for that is store.mansioningles.net.
As ever, thanks to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast through Patreon. That's Patreon, patreon.com/English podcast. Those are the people who donate a minimum of $1 plus VAT, the tax, a month. And by doing that, they get instant access to our recent transcriptions. We'd love to mention everybody's name, but we don't have enough time. So I'll just mention the most recent, the newest sponsors. They are Jessica Ramos, Jose Vázquez, Roque Montiel, and Luis Gil. So thank you to all the people who've been sponsoring us through Patreon.
One of our Patreon supporters recently sent me an email saying they were having problems to access the transcriptions. Well, when you sign up and when you agree to support us, you have to log in with a password in order to give your financial details, your credit card, etc. So you just log in to the Patreon website with your password and you can see the transcriptions on the website. There is an option for us to send you an email every time a transcription is published. I haven't done that because I don't like it when my email inbox is filled up with emails every week. But if you would prefer that, and I will probably send you an email to ask you individually, then of course that's an option that we can send you an email every time we publish a transcription. So look out for that email and let me know what you think. What's next week, Reza?
On next week's episode, we're going to talk about pace in English language.
So find out how fast you need to speak and listen next week. Thank you very much for listening this week. Until then, it's goodbye from Reza.
And bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.
George. No.
Hello, George.
Just a frog just appeared as I said that. Away, you frog.
Where did that frog come from? Drown the frog.
That's better.
Take two.
Hi there, I'm Reza here. Y'all?
Is that your American
I'll try to get
act from Alabama?
Yeah.